Why, hello there. Welcome to Peter Reads Books. We're going to read Zane Grey's Riders of the Purple Sage, which is a western. I thought we had the lovely science fiction last time. Now we're just going to go for something completely different, which is a western. It's not completely different, but I've read some of it now. What I'm going to read today, we're going to read two chapters. I have picked them wisely, chapter 1 and chapter 2, to begin with. I thought that was a sensible move. It is about um, Jane Withersteen, who is a Mormon, and her. Yeah, we're going to realize it as we go along. Let's not read too much of what's going to happen beforehand. So we're going to read the two chapters, and then when we're done, we're done. And when we're over an hour, we're over an hour. And if we take it less, then, it's going to be fine. It's going to be easier than saying we're going to continue for an hour to say we're going to read these chapters. It's going to be like 45 minutes, an hour, I think. And it's rather interesting because where H.G. Wells was really, really well written, and was interesting because it had this like first person perspective and sort of a framed story about his brother in the middle. This one is just sort of straightforward and easy, which is nice as well. So yeah, maybe let's just take the two chapters now. I was thinking next time possibly just do one, because 1 hour is actually a long time to sit and read. Also a long time to hear someone sitting reading badly. Oh, by the way, there's a lot of direct speech in this story with people from various places in the US. So I'm just going to fuck up all the accents. Just not discriminate at all. Just fuck them all up. Just consistently. I'm going to do that. So that's going to be my thing for this book. Just bad accents. It's going to be me. So let's start. Oh, shit. I have tried making a projector or a monitor, and it's not working particularly well. There we are. Chapter 1, Lassiter. A sharp clip-crop of iron-shod hooves deadened and died away, and clouds of yellow dust drifted from under the cottonwoods out over the sage. Jane Withersteen gazed down on the purple-white slope with dreamy and troubled eyes. A rider had just left her, and it was his message that had held her thoughtful and almost sad, awaiting the churchmen who were coming to resent and attack her right to befriend a Gentile. She wondered if the unrest and strife that had lately come to the little village of Cottonwoods was to involve her. And then she sighed, remembering that her father had founded this remotest border settlement of southern Utah, and that he had left it to her. She owned all of the ground and many of the cottages. Withersteen House was hers, and the great ranch, with its thousands of cattle, and the swiftest horses of the sage. To her belonged Amber Spring, the water which gave verdure and beauty to the village and made living possible on that wild purple upland waste. She could not escape being involved by whatever befell Cottonwoods. That year, 1871, had marked a change which had been gradually coming to the lives of the peace-loving Mormons of the border. Glaze, Stonebridge, Sterling, villages to the north had risen against the invasion of Gentile settlers and the forays of rustlers. There had been opposition to the one and fighting with the other, and now Cottonwoods had begun to wake and bestir itself and grown hard. Jane prayed that the tranquility and the sweetness of her life would not be permanently disrupted. She meant to do so much more for her people than she had done. She wanted the sleepy, quiet pastoral days to last always. Trouble between the Mormons and the Gentiles of the community would make her unhappy. She was Mormon-born, and she was a friend to poor and unfortunate Gentiles. She wished only to go on doing good and being happy. That's nice, isn't it? It's very, very, very straightforward. She's good. She's very, very good. Not a bad thought in that woman for some reason. And she thought of what that great ranch meant to her. She loved it all: the grove of the cottonwoods, the old stone house, the amber-tinted water, and the droves of shaggy, dusty horses and mustangs, the sleek, clean-limbed, blooded racers, and the browsing herds of cattle and the lean, sun-browned riders of the sage. While she waited there, she forgot the prospect of untoward change. The bray of a lazy burro broke the afternoon quiet, and it was comfortingly suggestive of the drowsy farmyard and the open corrals and the green alfalfa fields. Her clear sight intensified the purple sage slope as it rolled before her. Low swells of prairie-like ground sloped up to the west. Dark, lonely cedar trees, few and far between, stood out strikingly, and at long distances, ruins of red rocks. Farther on up the gradual slope rose a broken wall, a huge monument looming dark purple and stretching its solitary, mystic way, a wavering line that faded in the north. Here to the westward was the light and color of beauty. Northward, the slope descended to a dim line of canyons, which rose an upflinging of the earth, not mountainous, but a vast heave of purple uplands, with ribbed and fan-shaped walls, castle-crowned cliffs, and grey escarpments. Over it all crept the lengthening, waning afternoon shadows. The rapid beat of hooves recalled Jane Withersteen to the question at hand. A group of riders cantered up the lane, dismounted and threw their bridles. They were 7 in number, and Tull, the leader, a tall, dark man, was an elder of Jane's church. "Did you get my message?" he asked curtly. "Yes," replied Jane. "I sent word I'd give that rider Venters half an hour to come down to the village. He didn't come." "He knows nothing of it," said Jane. "I didn't tell him. I've been waiting here for you." "Where is Winters?" "I left him in the courtyard." "Here, Jerry," called Tull, turning to his men. "Take the gang and fetch Venters out of here if you have to rope him." The dusty-booted and long-spurred riders clanked noisily into the grove of cottonwoods and disappeared in the shade. "Elder Tull, what do you mean by this?" demanded Jane. "If you must arrest Venters, you might have the courtesy to wait until he leaves my home. And if you do arrest him, it will be adding insult to injury. It is absurd to accuse Venters of being mixed up in that shooting fray in the village last night. He was with me at the time. Besides, he let me take charge of his guns. You're only using this as a pretext. What do you mean to do to Venters?" "I'll tell you presently," replied Tull. "But first tell me why you defend this worthless rider." "Worthless!" exclaimed Jane indignantly. "He's nothing of the kind. He was the best rider I ever had. There's not a reason why I shouldn't champion him, and every reason why I should. It's no little shame to me, Elder Tull, that through my friendship he has roused the enmity of my people and become an outcast. Besides, I owe him eternal gratitude for saving the life of little Fay." I love how they're just so good. Like, oh, he's being ill-treated and he saved the life of little Fay. And she's just so good. She likes everything. She wants to help everybody and help her community, which is how it should be in a Western, obviously. I mean, you can't have complex characters. They're either evil or good, or selfish or grandiose or simple-minded people. It's how there's always like a simple-minded farmer or bartender or something in the Westerns. I love that. Besides, I owe him eternal gratitude for saving the life of little Fay. I've heard of your love of Fay Larkin and that you intend to adopt her. But, Jane Withersteen, the child is a Gentile. Yes, but, Elder, I don't love the Mormon children any less because I love a Gentile child. I shall adopt Fay if a mother will give her to me. I'm not so much against that. You can give the child Mormon teaching, said Tull. But I'm sick of seeing this fellow Venters hanging around you. I'm going to put a stop to it. You've so much love to throw away on these beggars of Gentiles that I've had an idea you might love Venters. Tull spoke with the arrogance of a Mormon whose power could not be brooked, and with the passion of a man in whom jealousy had kindled a consuming fire. Maybe I do love him, said Jane. She felt both fear and anger stir in her heart. I'd never thought of that. Poor fellow, he certainly needs someone to love him. This'll be a bad day for Ventus unless you deny that, returned Tull grimly. Tull's men appeared under the cottonwoods and led a young man out into the lane. His ragged clothes were those of an outcast, but he stood tall and straight, his wide shoulders flung back, with the muscles of his bound arms rippling and a blue flame of defiance in the gaze he bent on Tull. For the first time, Jane Withersteen felt Ventus's real spirit. She wondered if she would love this splendid youth. Then her emotion cooled to the sobering sense of the issue at stake. Ventus, will you leave Cottonwoods at once and forever? Asked Tull tensely. Why? Rejoined the rider. Because I order it. Ventus laughed in cool disdain. The red leaped to Tull's dark cheek. If you don't go, it means your ruin, he said sharply. Ruin, exclaimed Ventus passionately. Haven't you already ruined me? What do you call ruin? A year ago I was a rider. I had horses and cattle of my own. I had a good name in Cottonwoods. And now when I come into the village, I see this woman. You set your men on me. You hound me. You trail me as if I was a rustler. I have no more to lose except my life. Will you leave Utah? Oh, I know, went on Clamors tauntingly. It galls you, the idea of beautiful Jane Withersteen being friendly to a poor Gentile. You want her all yourself. You are a wiving Mormon. You have use for her, and Withersteen House in Amber Spring and 7,000 head of cattle. Tull's hard jaw protruded, and rioting blood corded the veins of his neck. Once more, will you go? No. Then I'll have you whipped within an inch of your life, replied Tull harshly. I'll turn you out on the sage, and if you ever come back, you'll get worse. Ventus's agitated face grew coldly set, and the bronze changed. Jane impulsively stepped forward. Oh, Elder Tull, she cried, you won't do that. Tull lifted a shaking finger towards her. That'll do from you. Understand, you'll not be allowed to hold this boy to a friendship that's offensive to your bishop. Jane Withersteen, your father left you wealth and power. It has turned your head. You haven't yet come to see the place of Mormon women. We've reasoned with you, borne with you. We've patiently waited. We've let you have your fling, which is more than I ever saw granted to a Mormon woman. But you haven't come to your senses. Now, once and for all, you can't have any further friendship with Ventus. He's going to be whipped, and he's going to leave Utah. Oh, don't whip him. It would be dastardly, implored Jane, with slow certainty of her failing courage. Tull always blunted a spirit, and she grew conscious that she had feigned a boldness which she did not possess. He loomed up now in different guise, not as a jealous suitor, but embodying the mysterious despotism she had known from childhood, the power of her creed. Ventus, will you take your whipping here, or would you rather go out into the sage? Asked Tull. He smiled a flinty smile that was more than inhuman, yet seemed to give out of its dark aloofness a gleam of righteousness. I'll take it here, if I must, said Ventus. But by God, Tull, you'd better kill me outright. That'll be a dear whipping for you and your praying Mormons. You'll have me another Lassiter. The strange glow, the austere light which radiated from Tull's face, might have been a holy joy at the spiritual conception of exalted duty. But there was something more in him, barely hidden, as something personal and sinister, a deep of himself, an engulfing abyss. As his religious mood was fanatical and inexorable, so would his physical hate be merciless. Elder, I repent my words, Jane faltered. The religion in her, the long habit of obedience, of humility, as well as agony of fear, spoke in her voice. Spare the boy, she whispered. You can't save him now, replied Tull stridently. Her head was bowing to the inevitable. She was grasping the truth when suddenly there came, in inward constriction, a hardening of gentle forces within her breast. Like a steel bar, it was stiffening all that had been soft and weak in her. She felt a birth in her of something new and unintelligible. Once more, her strange gaze sought the sage slopes. Jane Withersteen loved that wild and purple wilderness. In times of sorrow, it had been her strength. In happiness, its beauty was her continual delight. In her extremity she found herself murmuring, "Whence cometh my help?" It was a prayer, as if forth from those lonely purple reaches and walls of red and clefts of blue might ride a fearless man, neither creed bound nor creed mad, who would hold up a restraining hand in the faces of her ruthless people. So what she did was she grew hard and tough. Something was born in her, and what she did was she just sort of prayed, hoped. Well done. But this is a Western, so there's probably going to be something about it. The restless movements of Tull's men suddenly quieted down. Then followed a low whisper, a rustle, a sharp exclamation. "Look," said one, pointing to the west. "A rider!" Jane Withersteen wheeled and saw a horseman, silhouetted against the western sky, coming riding out of the sage. He had ridden down from the left in the golden glare of the sun and had been unobserved till close at hand. An answer to her prayer. "Do you know him? Does anybody know him?" questioned Tull hurriedly. His men looked, and one by one shook their heads. "He's come from afar," said one. "That's a fine horse," said another. "A strange rider." "Huh, he wears black leather," added a fourth. With a wave of his hand, enjoining silence, Tull stepped forward in such a way that he concealed Ventus. The rider reined in his mount, and with a lithe forward slipping action appeared to reach the ground in one long step. It was a peculiar movement in its quickness, and inasmuch that while performing it the rider did not swerve in the slightest from a square front to the group before him. "Look," hoarsely whispered one of Tull's companions. "He packs 2 black-butted guns, low down. They're hard to see, black akin to them black chaps." "A gunman," whispered another. "Fellas, careful now about moving your hands." The stranger's slow approach might have been a mere leisurely manner of gait, or the crammed short steps of a rider unused to walking. Yet, as well, it could have been the guarded advance of one who took no chances with men. "Hello, stranger," called Tull. No welcome was in this greeting, only a gruff curiosity. The rider responded with a curt nod. The wide brim of a black sombrero cast a dark shade over his face. For a moment he closely regarded Tull and his comrades, and then, halting in his slow walk, he seemed to relax. "Evening, ma'am," he said to Jane, and removed his sombrero with quaint grace. Jane, greeting him, looked up into a face that she trusted instinctively and which riveted her attention. It had all the characteristics of the range riders, the leanness, the red burn of the sun, and the set changelessness that came from years of silence and solitude. But it was not these which held her, rather the intensity of his gaze, a strange weariness, a piercing wistfulness of keen grey sight, as if the man was forever looking for that which he never found. Jane's subtle woman intuition, even in that brief instant, felt a sadness, a hungering, a secret. "Jane Withersteen, ma'am?" he inquired. "Yes," she replied. "The water here is yours." "Yes. May I water my horse?" "Certainly. There's the trough." "But maybe if you knew who I was," he hesitated, with a glance at the listening men. "Maybe you wouldn't let me water him, though I ain't asking for none myself." "Stranger, it doesn't matter who you are. Water your horse, and if you are thirsty and hungry, come into my house." "Thanks, ma'am. I can't accept for myself, but from a tired horse." Trembling of hoofs interrupted the rider. More restless movements on the part of Tull's men broke up the little circle, exposing the prisoner Ventus. "Maybe I've kind of hindered something, for a few moments perhaps?" inquired the rider. Yes, replied Jane Withersteen with a throb in her voice. She felt the drawing power of his eyes, and then she saw him look at the bound Ventus and at the men who held him and their leader. "In this here country, all the rustlers and thieves and cutthroats and gun throwers and all round no good men just happen to be Gentiles. Ma'am, which of the no good class does that young fella belong to?" "He belongs to none of them. He is an honest boy." "You know that, ma'am?" Yes, yes. Then what has he done to get tied up that way? His clear and distinct question, meant for Toll as well as for Jane Withersteen, stilled the restlessness and brought a momentary silence. Ask him, replied Jane, her voice rising high. The rider stepped away from her, moving out with the same slow, measured stride in which he had approached, and the fact that his action placed her wholly to one side, and him no nearer to Toll and his men, had a penetrating significance. Young fella, speak up, he said to Ventus. Here, stranger, this is none of your mix, began Toll. Don't try any interference. You've been asked to drink and eat. That's more than you'd have got in any other village of the Utah border. Water your horse and be on your way. Easy, easy. I ain't interfering yet, replied the rider. The tone of his voice had undergone a change. A different man had spoken. Where, in addressing Jane, he had been mild and gentle, now, with his first speech to Toll, he was dry, cool, biting. I've less stumbled onto a queer deal. 7 Mormons all packing guns, and a Gentile tied with a rope, and a woman who swears by his honesty. Queer, ain't that? Queer or not, it's none of your business, retorted Toll. Where I was raised, a woman's word was law. I ain't quite outgrowed that yet. Toll fumed between amaze and anger. Meddler, we have a law here, something different from woman's whim. Mormon law. Take care you don't transgress it. To hell with your Mormon law. The deliberate speech marked the rider's further change, this time from kindly interest to an awaking menace. It produced a transformation in Toll and his companions. The leader gasped and staggered backwards at a blasphemous affront to an institution he held most sacred. The man Jerry, holding the horses, dropped the bridles and froze in his tracks. Like posts, the other men stood watchful-eyed, arms hanging rigid, all waiting. Speak up now, young man. What have you done to be roped that way? It's a damned outrage, burst out Ventus. I've done nothing wrong. I've offended this Mormon elder by being a friend to that woman. Ma'am, is it true what he says? Asked the rider of Jane, but his quivering, alert eyes never left the little knot of quiet men. True? Yes, perfectly true, she answered. Well, young man, it seems to me that being a friend to such a woman would be what you wouldn't want to help and couldn't help. What's to be done to you for it? They intend to whip me. You know what that means in Utah. I reckon, replied the rider slowly. With his grey glance cold on the Mormons, with the restive bit champing of the horses, with Jane failing to repress her mounting agitations, with Ventus standing pale and still, the tension of the moment tightened. Toll broke the spell with a laugh without mirth, a laugh that was only a sound betraying fear. Come on, men, he called. Jane Withersteen turned again to the rider. Stranger, can you do nothing to save Ventus? Ma'am, you asked me to save him. From your own people. I ask you, I beg of you. But you don't dream who you're asking. Oh, sir, I pray you, save him. These are Mormons, and I, at any cost, save him, for I care for him. Toll snarled, You lovesick fool. Tell your secrets. There'll be a way to teach you what you've never learned. Come, men, out of here. Mormon, the young man stays, said the rider. Like a shot, his voice halted. What? Who'll keep him? He's my prisoner, cried Toll hotly. Stranger, again I tell you, don't mix here. You've meddled enough. Go your way, or listen. He stays. Absolute certainty, beyond any shadow of doubt, breathed in the rider's low voice. Who are you? We are 7 here. The rider dropped his sombrero and made a rapid movement, singular in that it left him somewhat crouched, arms bent and stiff, with the big black gun sheaths swung round to the fore. Lassiter! It was Ventus's wandering, thrilling cry that bridged the fateful connection between the rider's singular position and the dreaded name. Toll put out a groping hand. The life of his eyes dulled to the gloom with which men of his... I'm going to read that again. The life of his eyes dulled to the gloom with which men of his fear saw the approach of death. But death, while it hovered over him, did not descend, for the rider waited for the twitching fingers, the downward flash of hand that did not come. Toll, gathering himself together, turned to the horses, attended by his pale comrades. It's the end of chapter 1, and we have had the priests who are slightly xenophobic, but they're also greedy. They want her stuff. We have a good woman who's just so good and caring and loving. Then we have the good man who's honest and who is downtrodden. And then we have the gunslinger, Lassiter, who is helping for some reason, even though we know that he is sort of a bad guy. Bit like all the other bad guys throughout Western history. We've got everything so far, and we're in the countryside. There's a ranch, there's wealth that they want, riders, everybody's on horses, and the number 7 for some reason as well reminds me of sort of an evil 7. It's a good movie though. You should watch it. Chapter 2, Cottonwoods. Ventus appeared too deeply moved to speak the gratitude his face expressed. And Jane turned upon the rescuer and gripped his hands. Her smiles and tears seemingly dazed him. Presently, as something like calmness returned, she went to Lassiter's weary horse. "I'll water him myself," she said, and she led the horse to a trough under a huge old cottonwood. With nimble fingers, she loosened the bridle and removed the bit. The horse snorted and bent his head. The trough was of solid stone, hollowed out, moss-covered and green and wet and cool, and the clear brown water that fed it spouted and splashed from a wooden pipe. "He has brought you far today?" "Yes, ma'am. A matter of over 60 miles, maybe 70. "A long ride. A ride that... Ah! He's blind." "Yes, ma'am," replied Lassiter. "What blinded him? Some men once roped and tied him. Then they held wide iron close to his eyes." "Oh, men! You mean devils? Were they your enemies? Mormons?" "Yes, ma'am. To take revenge on a horse. Lassiter, the men of my creed are unnaturally cruel. Lassiter, the men of my creed are unnaturally cruel. To my everlasting sorrow I confess it. They have been driven, hated, scourged till their hearts have been hardened. But we women hope and pray for the time when our men will soften." "Begging your pardon, ma'am, that time will never come." "Oh, it will. Lassiter, do you think the Mormon women wicked? Has your hand been against them too?" "No, I believe Mormon women are the best and noblest, the most long-suffering and the blindest, unhappiest women on earth." "Ah," she gave him a grave, thoughtful look. "Then you will break bread with me?" Lassiter had no ready response, and he uneasily shifted his weight from one leg to another and turned his sombrero round and round in his hand. "Ma'am," he began presently, "I reckon your kindness of heart makes you overlook things. Perhaps I ain't well known hereabouts, but back in the north, there's Mormons who'd rest uneasy in their graves at the idea of me sitting to table with you." "I dare say. But will you do it anyway?" she asked. "Maybe you have a brother or relative who might drop in and be offended, and I wouldn't want to. I have not a relative in Utah that I know of. There's no one with the right to question my actions." She turns smilingly to Ventus. "You will come in, Bairn, and Lassiter will come in. We'll eat and be merry while we may." "I'm only wondering if Tull and his men will raise a storm down the village," said Lassiter, his last weakening stand. "Yes, he'll raise a storm. After he's prayed," replied Jane. "Come." She led the way with the bridle of Lassiter's horse over her arm. They entered a grove and walked down a wide path shaded by great low-branching cottonwoods. The last rays of the setting sun sent golden bars through the leaves. The grass was deep and rich, welcome contrast to sage-tired eyes. Twittering quail darted across the path, and from a treetop somewhere a robin sang its evening song, and on the still air floated the freshness and murmur of flowing water. The home of Jane Withersteen stood in a circle of cottonwoods, and was a flat, long, red stone structure with a covered court in the center, through which flowed a lively stream of amber-colored water. In the massive blocks of stone and heavy timbers, and solid doors and shutters showed the hand of a man who had built it against pillage and time. And in the flowers and mosses lining the stone-bedded stream, in the bright colors of rugs and blankets on the court floor, and the cozy corner with hammock and books, and the clean-linened table showed the grace of a daughter who lived for happiness and the day at hand. Jane turned Lassiter's horse loose in the thick grass. "You'll want him to be near you," she said, "or I'd have taken him to the alfalfa fields." At her call appeared women who began at once to bustle about, hurrying to and fro, setting the table. Then Jane, excusing herself, went within. She passed through a huge, low-ceiled chamber, like the inside of a fort, and into a smaller one. Hang on 1 second. She passed through a low-ceiled chamber, like the inside of a fort, and into a smaller one, where a bright wood fire blazed in an old open fireplace, and from this into her own room. It had the same comfort as was manifested in the home-like outer court. Moreover, it was warm and rich in soft hues. Seldom did Jane Withersteen enter her room without looking into her mirror. She knew she loved the reflection of that beauty, which since early childhood she had never been allowed to forget. Her relatives and friends, and later a horde of Mormon and Gentile suitors, had fanned the flame of natural vanity in her, so that at 28 she scarcely thought at all of her wonderful influence for good in the little community where her father had left her practically its beneficent landlord, but cared most for the dream and the assurance and the allurement of her beauty. This time, however, she gazed into the glass with more than the usual happy motive, without the usual slight conscious smile, for she was thinking more than the desire to be fair in her own eyes, in those of her friend. She wondered if she were to seem fair in the eyes of this Lassiter, this man whose name had crossed the long wild breaks of stone and plains of sage, this gentle-voiced, sad-faced man who was a hater and a killer of Mormons. It was not now her usual half-conscious, vain obsession that actuated her as she hurriedly changed her riding dress to one of white, and then looked long at the stately form with its gracious contours, at the fair face with its strong chin and full firm lips, at the dark blue, proud and passionate eyes. "If by some means I can keep him here for a few days, a week, he'll never kill another Mormon," she mused. Lassiter. I shudder when I think of that name, of him. But when I look at the man, I forget who he is. I almost like him. I remember only that he saved Bern. He has suffered. I wonder what it was like. Did he love a Mormon woman once? How splendidly he championed us poor misunderstood souls. Somehow he knows much. Jane Withersteen joined her guests and bade them to her board. Dismissing her woman, she waited upon them with her own hands. It was a bountiful supper and a strange company. On her right sat the ragged and half-starved Ventus, and through blind eyes could have seen what he counted for in the sum of her happiness. Yet he looked the gloomy outcast his allegiance had made him, and about him there was the shadow of the ruin presaged by Tull. On her left sat black leather-garbed Lassiter, looking like a man in a dream. Hunger was not with him, nor composure, nor speech, and when he twisted in frequent unquiet movements, the heavy guns that he had not removed knocked against the table legs. If it had been otherwise possible to forget the presence of Lassiter, those telling little jars would have rendered it unlikely, and Jane Withersteen talked and smiled and laughed with all the dazzling play of lips and eyes that a beautiful, daring woman could summon to a purpose. When the meal ended and the men pushed back their chairs, she leaned closer to Lassiter and looked square into his eyes. "Why did you come to Cottonwoods?" Her question seemed to break a spell. The rider arose as if he had just remembered himself and had tarried longer than his wont. "Ma'am, I have wandered all over southern Utah and Nevada for something, and through your name, I learned where to find it, here in Cottonwoods. My name? Oh, I remember. You did know my name when you spoke first. Well, tell me, where have you heard it, and from whom? At the little village, Glaze, I think it's called, some 50 miles or more west of here. And I heard it from a Gentile, a rider who said you'd know where to tell me to find. What? She demanded, imperiously, as Lassiter broke off. Millie Earn's grave, he answered low, and the words came out with a wrench. Vences wheeled in his chair to regard Lassiter in amazement, and Jane slowly raised herself in white, still wonder. Millie Earn's grave, she echoed in a whisper. What do you know of Millie Earn? No, not Millie Earn, sorry. Millie Earn, my best beloved friend, who died in my arms. What were you to her? Did I claim to be anything? He inquired. I know people, relatives, who have long wanted to know where she's buried. That's all. Relatives? She never spoke of relatives, except a brother who was shot in Texas. Lassiter, Millie Earn's grave is in a secret burying ground on my property. Will you take me there? You'll be offending Mormons worse than by breaking bread with me. Indeed, yes, but I'll do it. Only we must go unseen. Tomorrow, perhaps. Thank you, Jane Witherstein, replied the rider, and he bowed to her and stepped backwards out of the court. That was easy for him, wasn't it? Will you break these rules? Well, okay, sure, let's go. But that is not the point of the story. The point of the story is the shooting and the whole setup of it, not the characters and not the narration. Will you not sleep under my roof? She asked. No, ma'am, and thanks again. I never sleep indoors. And even if I did, there's that gathering storm in the village below. No, I'll go to the sage. I hope you won't suffer none for your kindness to me. Lassiter, said Ventus with a half-bitter laugh, my bed too is the sage. Perhaps we may meet out there. Maybe so, but the sage is wide and I won't be near. Good night. At Lassiter's low whistle, the black horse whinnied and carefully picked his blind way out of the grove. The rider did not bridle him, but walked beside him, leading him by the touch of hand, and together they passed slowly into the shade of the cottonwoods. Jane, I must be off soon, said Vences. Give me my guns. If I had my guns, either my friends or the elder of my church would be lying dead, she interposed. Tull would be, surely. Oh, you fierce-blooded savage youth! Can't I teach you forbearance, mercy? Burn, it is divine to forgive your enemies. Let not the sun go down upon thy wrath. Hush, talk to me no more of mercy or religion after today. Today this strange coming of Lassiter left me still a man, and now I'll die a man. Give me my guns. Silently she went into the house, to return with a heavy cartridge belt and gun-filled sheath and a long rifle. These she handed to him, and as he buckled on the belt, she stood before him in silent eloquence. Jane, he said in a gentler voice, don't look so. I'm not going out to murder your churchman. I'll try to avoid him and all his men. But can't you see I've reached the end of my rope? Jane, you're a wonderful woman. Never was there a woman so unselfish and good. Only you are blind in one way. Listen. From behind the grove came the clicking sound of horses in a rapid trot. Some of your riders, he continued. It's getting time for the night shift. Let us go out to the bench in the grove and talk there. It was still daylight in the open, but under the spreading cottonwoods, shadows were obscuring the lanes. Ventus drew Jane off from one of these into a shrub-lined trail, just wide enough for the two to walk abreast, and in a roundabout way led her far from the house to a knoll on the edge of the grove. Here, in the secluded nook, was a bench from which, through an opening in the treetops, could be seen the sage slope and the wall of rock and the dim lines of canyons. Jane had not spoken since Ventus had shocked her with his first harsh speech. But all the way she had clung to his arm, and now, as he stopped and laid his rifle against the bench, she still clung to him. Jane, I'm afraid I must leave you. Bern, she cried. Yes, it looks that way. My position is not a happy one. I can't feel right. I've lost all. I'll give you anything you listen, please. When I say loss, I don't mean what you think. I mean loss of goodwill, good name. That that which would have enabled me to stand up in this village without bitterness. Well, it's too late. Now, as to the future, I think you'd do best to give me up. Tull is implacable. You ought to see from his intention today that, but you can't see. Your blindness, your damned religion. Jane, forgive me. I am sore within, and something rankles. Well, I fear that invisible hand will turn its hidden work to your ruin. Invisible hand? Burn, I mean your bishop. Ventus said it deliberately, and it would not release her as she started back. Ventus said it deliberately and would not release her as she started back. He's the law. The edict went forth to ruin me. Well, look at me. It'll now go forth to compel you to the will of the church. You wrong Bishop Dyer. Tull is hard, I know, but then he has been in love with me for years. Oh, your faith and your excuses. You can't see what I know, and if you did see it, you'd not admit it to save your life. That's the Mormon of you. These elders and the bishops will do absolutely any deed to go on building up the power and wealth of their church, their empire. Think of what they've done to the Gentiles here, to me. Think of Millie Ern's fate. What do you know of her story? I know enough. All, perhaps, except the name of the Mormon who brought her here. But I must stop this kind of talk. She pressed his hand in response. He helped her to a seat beside him on the bench, and he respected a silence that he divined was full of woman's deep emotion beyond his understanding. It's very crass in this in the distinction between man and woman, and just like Mormons. You're a Mormon, you just follow your religion. It's sort of just programmed into you. Seems very, very crass. But again, it is a Western. It can do this. It was the moment when the last ruddy rays of the sunset brightened momentarily before yielding to twilight. And for Ventus, the outlook before him was in some sense similar to a feeling of his future. And with searching eyes, he studied the beautiful purple, barren waste of sage. Here was the unknown and the perilous. The whole scene impressed Ventus as a wild, austere, and mighty manifestation of nature. And as it somehow reminded him of his prospect, in life, so it suddenly resembled the woman near him. Only in her there were greater beauty and peril, a mystery more unsolvable, and something nameless that numbed his heart and dimmed his eye. Look, a rider! Exclaimed Jane, breaking the silence. Can that be Lassiter? Ventus moved his glance once more to the west. A horseman showed dark on the skyline, and then merged into the color of the sage. Might be, but I think not. That fellow was coming in. One of your riders, more like. Yeah, I see him clearly now, and there's another. I see them too. Jane, your riders seem as many as the bunches of sage. I ran into 5 yesterday, way down near the trail to Deception Pass. They were with the White Herd exposition. That's well done. Gonna hear about Deception Pass and stuff. You still go to that canyon? Burn, I wish you wouldn't. Aldring and his rustlers live somewhere down there. Well, what of that? Tull has already hinted to your frequent trips into Deception Pass. I know, Ventus uttered a short laugh. He'll make a rustler of me next. But Jane, there's no water for 50 miles after I leave here, and the nearest is in the canyon. I must drink and water my horse. There, I see more riders. They are going out. The red herd is on the slope towards the pass. Twilight was fast falling. A group of horsemen crossed the dark line of low ground to become more distinct as they climbed the slope. The silence broke to a clear call from an incoming rider, and, almost like the peal of a hunting horn, floated back the answer. The outgoing riders moved swiftly, came sharply into sight as they topped a ridge to show wild and black above the horizon, and then passed down, dimming into the purple sage. I hope they don't meet Lassiter, said Jane. So do I, replied Ventus. By this time the riders of the night shift know what happened today. but Lassiter will likely keep out of their way. Byrne, who is Lassiter? He's only a name to me. A terrible name. Who is he? I don't know, Jane. Maybe I never... No, nobody I ever met knows him. He talks a little like a Texan, like Millie Erne. Did you know that? Yes, how strange of him to know her. And she lived here 10 years and has been dead too. Byrne, what do you know of Lassiter? Tell me what he has done. Why you spoke of him to Toll, threatening to become another Lassiter yourself. Jane, I only heard things, rumors, stories, most of which I disbelieved. At Blaze, his name was known, but none of the riders or ranchers I knew there ever met him. At Stonebridge, I never heard him mentioned, but at Sterling and villages north of there, he was spoken of often. I've never been in a village which he had been known to visit. I've never been in a village which he has been known to visit. There were many conflicting stories about him and his doings. Some said he had shut up this and that Mormon village, and others denied it. I'm inclined to believe he has. And you know how Mormons hide the truth. But there was one feature about Lassiter upon which all agree, that he was what writers in this country call a gunman. He's a man with a marvelous quickness and accuracy in the use of a Colt. And now that I've seen him, I know more. Lassiter was born without fear. I watched him with an eye which saw my... I watched him with eyes which saw him my friend. I will never forget the moment I recognized him from what had been told me of his crouch before the draw. It was then I yelled his name. I believe that yell saved Toll's life. At any rate, I know this now. At any rate, I know this. Between Toll and death, there was not the breadth of the littlest hair. If he or any of his men had moved a finger downwards, Ventus left his meaning unspoken, but at the suggestion, Jane shuddered. The pale afterglow in the west darkened with the merging of twilight into night. The sage now spread out black and gloomy. One dim star glittered in the southwest sky. The sound of trotting horses had ceased, and there was silence broken only by a faint, dry pattering of cottonwood leaves in the soft night wind. Onto this peace and calm suddenly broke the high-keyed yelp of a coyote, and from far off in the distance came the faint answering note of a trailing mate. "Hello, the sage dogs are barking," said Ventus. "I don't like to hear them," replied Jane. "At night, sometimes, when I lie awake, listening to the long mourn or breaking bark or wild howl, I think of how you sleep somewhere in the sage, and my heart aches. Jane, you couldn't listen to sweeter music, nor could I have a better bet. Just think, men like Lassiter and you have no home, no comfort, no rest, no place to lay your weary heads. Well, let us be patient. Toll's anger may cool, and time may help us. You might do some service to the village. Who can tell? Suppose you discovered the long unknown hiding place of Aldring and his bands, and told it to my riders. That would disarm Toll's ugly hints and put you in favor. For years my riders have trailed the tracks of stolen cattle. You know as well as I how dearly we've paid for our ranges in this wild country. Aldring drives our cattle down into the network of deceiving canyons, and somewhere far to the north or east he drives them up and out to Utah markets. If you will spend time in Deception Pass, try to find the trails. Jane, I've thought of that. I'll try. I must go now, and it hurts. For now, I'll never be sure of seeing you again. But tomorrow, Byrne? Tomorrow, surely. I'll watch for Lassiter and ride in with him. Good night. Then she left him and moved away, a wide, gliding shape that soon vanished in the shadows. Ventus waited until the faint slam of a door assured him that she had reached the house. Then, taking up his rifle, he noiselessly slipped through the bushes, down the knoll, and on under the dark trees to the edge of the grove. The sky was now turning from grey to blue. Stars had begun to lighten the earlier blackness, and from the wide, flat sweep before him blew a cold wind, fragrant with the breath of sage. Keeping close to the edge of the cottonwoods, he went swiftly and silently westward. The grove was long, and he had not reached the end when he heard something that brought him to a halt. Low padded thuds told him horses were coming this way. He sank down in the gloom, waiting, listening. Much before he had expected, judging from sound, to his amazement he descried horsemen near at hand. They were riding along the border of the sage, and instantly he knew the hoofs of the horses were muffled. Then the pale starlight afforded him indistinct sights of the riders, but his eyes were keen and used to the dark, and by peering closely he recognized the huge bulk and black-bearded visage of Aldring and the lithe, supple forms of the rustless lieutenant and masked rider. They passed on, the darkness swallowed them. Then farther out on the sage, a dark, compact body of horsemen went by, almost without sound, almost like spectres, and they too melted into the night. Well, that fit pretty well. That's the end of the chapter. So it's 10-4. Maybe we should... Could we do two more next time as well? I'll let you know. I haven't decided yet. Possibly I'll just do half an hour twice a week instead, because it's a long time to sit and it's a long time to listen to as well, I think. But this seems like it's going to be a decent book. It's not terrible. There's a lot of stuff, like it's very old. It's obviously very old. It's over 100 years old, I think. Almost 100 years old. And there's just a lot of weird concepts and just rugged exposition, but I kind of like this. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. So next time is gonna be on Sunday as well. Next Sunday, same time. And hope you enjoyed it. See you then.